The first speaker will be Brent Fulton from China Source, who's also written extensively about the various challenges to the churches in this new context. Our next speaker will be Chiereto Yan, comes to us from Shanghai now. He has written about evangelization in the new context of China.
As Myron Youngman pointed out to us last night, the church in China has undergone immense transformation in a very short period of time. And the contrast between the Protestant Christian presence in China at the start of the Reform period versus 2 decades later could not be more striking. In China's cities in the early 1980s, churches were just beginning to reopen under the auspices of the Three Self-Patriotic Movement. Most who attended were older believers who had come to faith before 1949. While the rural church was experiencing extraordinary growth, Protestantism overall was still marginalized, largely hidden, and unengaged with the society at large. Fast forward to the mid-2000s, and we see a new kind of Christian community emerging. Its members are comparatively well-educated. Unlike the previous generation of house church believers, these young Christians meet openly in public spaces. By virtue of their occupations and their intentional engagement with society, they can be found in the mainstream of urban life. The growth of the urban church has been the subject of considerable inquiry in recent years. Rodney Stark and Xiuhua Wang used the concept cultural incongruity to explain why so many have come to faith in urban China. Since traditional beliefs rooted in China's agrarian society cannot answer the questions posed by the new environment, the result is a crisis, a quote, crisis of cultural incongruity, a conflict between the cultural assumptions of modernity and those of traditional religious culture, end quote. Li Ma and Jin Li point to the emergence of urban congregations out of campus fellowships that were started in the 1980s and 1990s, as well as a significant number of Chinese students abroad. Some have estimated as high as 10% who embraced Christianity while overseas. Lured by government incentives and business opportunities, many who became believers abroad have returned to China in the past 2 decades and joined returnee fellowships or local churches in the cities. This research helps to explain the growth of Christianity in urban China. Yet the church in the countryside also experienced dramatic growth. What sets the urban church apart is its visibility and influence in urban society. China's massive urbanization created the conditions for this new kind of Protestant community to emerge. I suggest that we can understand how this happened by looking at 3 domains, which we will refer to with a shorthand as place, space, and face. Place refers to the physical location of the church. Space refers to the social space in which the church has been allowed to exercise its influence. And face denotes the church's moral authority within the society. So first of all, one of the most significant breakthroughs for these unregistered churches was the ability to meet in the same location over time. Unlike the rural house church movement that constituted the backbone of church growth in the 1980s and 90s, these urban gatherings took to renting office space or whole apartments for Sunday services and other activities during the week. As Li Ma and Jin Li point out in their book, Surviving the State, Remaking the Church, the growth of the market economy, China's rising standard of living, the passage of property legislation, and the real estate boom that began in the mid-2000s all helped to create the conditions for standalone, unregistered churches to flourish. In return, the enhanced visibility of these churches attracted more converts, resulting in further growth. While it was common in the 1980s for house church pastors to be harassed, detained, fined, or imprisoned, authorities in the 2000s took a decidedly different tack in dealing with the newly emerging urban churches. which were technically illegal since they existed outside the sphere of the officially sanctioned Three Self-Patriotic movement. These urban churches existed in a legal gray area that was steadily expanding, providing room for a more highly organized and public expression of their faith, but offering no legal protection should authorities decide to take action against them. In addition to a place for worship, urbanization also allowed the church to enjoy an expanded space in which to live out the Christian faith. The same physical and virtual infrastructure that brought China's cities closer together enabled a new degree of collaboration among believers, resulting in a critical mass of Christians able to share information and resources, whether through citywide pastors' prayer fellowships, jointly run training centers, publishing projects, or conferences for mobilizing missionaries from China. This critical mass is clearly evident in China's dynamic online Christian community. Thousands of websites run by churches and organizations have kept believers connected and provided resources of various kinds. Hundreds of online magazines and newspapers have kept believers informed. Add to this millions of microblog accounts, streaming video, Christian dating sites, online book distributors, virtual seminary courses, plus the ongoing chatter on WeChat and other messaging services. And the internet has enabled Christians across the country to experience community in ways they had not been able to experience it previously. As with Christian communities elsewhere in the world, the internet became a lifeline during the global pandemic, enabling Chinese Christians to continue meeting even though they could no longer gather physically. The church's growing space in urban society has come about as Christians have moved from pietistic withdrawal, the posture commonly assumed by rural house church believers, to active social engagement. This has been both an intentional theological shift as well as a very practical response to the needs of urban society. The turning point for the urban church came with the tragic Sichuan Earthquake in 2008. Overnight, Chengdu, the major city closest to the quake's epicenter in Wenchuan, became a hub of Christian activity as believers rushed from cities across China to offer aid. In the words of one church leader, that year was the birth of the church in China going public. It was a very special year. The church's response did not go unnoticed by local authorities, who subsequently took a more moderate or more tolerant attitude towards religious groups. Finally, urbanization has allowed the church to engage within the commercial space of the city. While the church had formerly been thriving in an agricultural environment, it now thrives in many corners of China's business world. The Wenzhou Boss Christian model, as profiled by Nanlai Cao in his study of the Wenzhou Church, features entrepreneurs who also figure prominently as pastors and elders in churches they helped to found. Often referred to as the Jerusalem of China due to its high Christian population, Wenzhou provides an extreme case of how influential Christian businessmen have advanced the gospel and raised the church's profile by building lavish churches, forming business fellowships, engaging in charity activities, and conducting evangelistic and training events in their factories. Christian business leaders in other cities have also met regularly for prayer, Bible study, and discussions on ways to integrate faith and business. Whereas a previous generation of rural Christians may have viewed business as worldly, these urban believers embraced a theology of work as calling. A third feature of the church's contemporary experience is the face that the church has gained within urban society. As we've discussed, this visibility has come about in part through the unregistered church's establishment of fixed locations for public worship. Its online presence has positioned Christianity as a viable competitor in the virtual public square that has taken shape as China's market economy has given rise to a marketplace of beliefs. Through social engagement, the church has gained face amongst an otherwise skeptical public as it addresses issues that are of common concern. In the case of Wenzhou, Nanlai Cao says, Christianity has gradually emerged as a dominant form of Chinese urban religiosity and a major source of cultural legitimacy for the new rich class in the context of a modern commercialized economy. China's workplace Christians, says Cao, play an active role in shaping the public image of Christianity in local society. For Christians in China's face-saving culture, gaining face means being willing to save the government's face. As theologian Jackson Wu explains, there are two kinds of face in China's honor-shame-based society. Mianzi, which is gained largely through achievement that enhances one's reputation, and Lian, which has a moral component and is gained by being seen as having virtuous character. Unlike the rural church, which was often looked down upon by the government and the society at large, it may be argued that today's urban church has been able to gain face, Mianzi, through its positive social contributions and through the witness of individual believers whose achievements and character are seen as exemplary. Since the unregistered urban church's growing prominence flies in the face of regulations intended to contain religion, believers have had to perform a delicate dance vis-a-vis local officials charged with enforcing these regulations. Ian Johnson described the well-known early rain Reformed church in Chengdu as a parallel realm outside the party's control. The challenge for pastors in this parallel realm has been to push the envelope of Christian activity without becoming too visible, too large, or too politically sensitive, all of which could cause local officials to lose face, thus forcing them to take action against the church. While the Sichuan Earthquake in 2008 showed the urban church's potential to be a force for expanding the civil society space in China, the past decade has seen a concerted effort by the government to shrink that space, insisting that all groups that serve the society must be under the leadership of the party. Seeking to maintain the moral high ground, the Communist Party cannot tolerate other voices for justice and righteousness that may undermine the legitimacy and cause it to lose face. In the words of Purdue University sociologist Yang Fenggang, determined to stay in power, the Chinese Communist authorities are keen to suppress any social group that might become a rival or threat to its power, be it religious or not. The faith-based organizations are perceived as one of the most serious threats to the Communist Party. In preparing this talk, I drew on a paper I wrote 4 years ago for much of my description of the urban church. At that time, I was writing in the present tense, as the story was still unfolding. Revising this material required putting much of it into the past tense, as the situation of the urban and registered church has changed significantly in recent years. Returning to the three domains we have considered here, while urbanization provided the conditions for urban believers to establish permanent places of worship, to expand their social space, and to gain face in the community, all along they have been operating in contested territory. Today, the Christians' repurposing of physical space and physical place and social space to advance the church's agenda is at odds with the official vision of urban society set forth in policy documents and regulations. The party is pushing back hard on the urban unregistered church movement. Large meeting places have been shut down. Landlords are being pressured not to rent space to Christian groups. Bibles are no longer available in online bookstores, nor can Bible apps be found online. Religious content is being censored on WeChat. Believers have been sentenced for illegally publishing Christian materials or running Christian schools. Restrictions on religious activities for minors are being enforced, and atheistic propaganda is being stepped up in the education and media sectors. The space for Christianity in urban China appears to be shrinking rapidly. Over the past 2 decades, Chinese Christians have creatively utilized the resources available to them in the urban context to advance their cause. How they will adapt in a changing political climate remains to be seen and will be an important topic of research in the days ahead.
How Catholics adapt to change in China from a missiological perspective. Vatican II shift the attention of the church from the church itself to the interlocutor whom mission aims at. Therefore, we want to see how is the China situation. We talk about migration, urbanization. China has experienced the biggest human migration and urbanization in human history. Half of the Chinese population moved from the poor rural area to the cities in the last 40 years. Enormous social changes and challenges. What about Catholics? The characteristics of the Catholics, historically, Catholic communities are mostly concentrated in some rural areas. Although the Catholic population comprised only 1% of the Chinese population, less than 1% of the Chinese population. The church in China has to cope with this change, migration, urbanization. In the present social context, we look into the mission of the church. I'll speak mainly about the importance of formation for the laity and the youth. I will concentrate on three groups. One is the students and the youth. The other are migrant families. And the third group are the professionals in the cities and entrepreneur Christians. Accompaniment formation according to different age groups or status of life are very important. The laity and the youth play an active role in the process, in the evangelization or in this urban-rural mobility. Many youth in the rural area have gone through the experience of the so-called left behind children. They have faced similar problems of lack of communication with parents. Several dioceses in northern province of Hebei, where many Catholics, 1/5 of the Catholic population is concentrated, they started an initiative called 100-Day Formation Program for the youth. Boys and girls separated. The program concentrates on human promotion, values, communication skill, and is offered to youth who are free from commitment at work or school for 3 months. It is a good opportunity to take a break from the usual highly competitive environment and discern about the direction in their life. And there are also some activities or trainings or schools for children, for the migrant workers in the cities. Another group I want to talk about is the youth and the students. As for university students, college is time for academic pursuit. At the same time, independent thinking and seeking of meaningful life are important. The youth, many from the countryside, go to big cities for their studies. Summer vacation or winter vacation, they will go back to the home province in their diocese. They organize summer camps, winter camps, sharings. But throughout the school year, they are in the city where they study, and sometimes they are able to join together for Sunday Mass in the vicinity of the university. And starting from the year 2000, many different what we call Catholic associations for students were formed spontaneously in the city hosting these students. So in a way, it's not only during summer or winter that they have these summer camps. These student associations are formed and they can meet with other students coming from other provinces or other dioceses. So this is what we call like fellowship or faith and friendship groups. As for high school students, there is a group called YCS, Young Catholic Students, that care and pay attention to the needs of high school students. According to its guiding principle, the youth should animate the youth themselves. Although they have priests as spiritual directors, in the light of the gospel, the teenagers are accompanying one another in the process of see, judge, act, review of life, and benefit from this group's experience. As they grow spiritually and in age, some feel the call to dedicate themselves to help the younger ones. Therefore, senior high school students taking care of the junior, and some even after entering university, they prefer to remain to animate these high school students. So in these different provinces that they come from, and then they gathered in the city where they study, and then they go back. Sometimes there are priests assigned by diocese to follow them. But then at times also gather around the premise of the church and the local parish will take care of the doing pastoral work and taking care of the youth. Another group is the migrant families and professionals. As for adults, there are formation centers in many dioceses. Formation program and activities are regularly held for specific groups such as pastoral workers, married couples, or professionals such as teachers camp, programs help them witness the gospel in their specific fields and environments. As for migrants to cities, Bishop Jing Luxian, Aloysius Jing, once in a pastoral letter of the Chinese New Year said he praised the faithfuls coming from the countryside, from Wenzhou area, who are residing in Shanghai. They are fervent Catholics active in the Shanghai diocese. So he also assigned a priest as a spiritual director for them. He encourages also the diocese, the priests in the cities, to dedicate time to take care of these migrant families coming from the provinces, to let them feel like a family. And the group is the professionals, or they are well-educated people active in the church. Sometimes they serve as a bridge to communicate with society and at times with the government. Then there's another group, what we call entrepreneur Christians, or 老板基督徒. There is an enterprise at Ningjing, northern province of Hebei, that employs several thousand workers. Mr. Geng is a self-made man, with the whole family are fervent Catholics. He tried to instill Christian spirit in the corporate culture and in management. He didn't study much, but he employed well-talented people. The employees were well treated with paid holidays. For example, he will organize wholesome activities for them. Pay was pay according to the productions. At one point, the workers who were Catholics were free from work on Sunday because they go to Mass. At some point, he decided, why don't we let everybody be free on Sunday? And he was, in that occasion, he was asking the the workers, I was present there, sharing. He said, "Did our production went down?" Everybody said no, and in a way, also he tried to testimony as a Christian in his working place, and then, of course, in a way, it's also to evangelize, and there are people who became Catholic among the workforce. There are challenges, but every challenge is also an opportunity, as the Chinese ideogram expresses. This city countryside exchange, on one hand, they have to adapt to the change, but very often time, for example, students, when they go to big cities, they don't have the burden of their parents, the place of their origin, as we have mentioned these 2 days. There are two communities in China: the official church or the underground community, or even in the Protestant church, they have this dynamics or polemics. But then these students, they meet together at the school campus. They went back to their hometown. In a way, it helped this reconciliation process between the two communities, the different communities. And in fact, the Holy Father emphasized on the synodal church, which is walking together, joining together, and going towards the periphery, going towards those who are in need. There is continuity, in the magisterium of the recent popes, starting from Pope St. John Paul II, Benedict the XVI, with his letter, also helped this reconciliation of the communities, the Catholic communities, and with Pope Francis. Now, there are new religious regulations, as we have just point out. There are the 5 established religions are recognized by the government. And somehow, this new religious policy make a point that that religions should follow the leadership of the government. But in a way, I reflect on it, it's more of a Confucian culture. Confucianism is dominant in Chinese history, and the religions are administered under the umbrella of the Confucianists. There are limitations, but the church is adapting to this process. Now, for example, the minor seminaries, there are only a few minor seminaries running in China, but it depends very much on the diocese itself how to take care of the seminarians and family educations, religious education in the family, to foster vocations also in not only for priesthood, but also as committed Christians. So as a conclusion, I say we have seen the particularly important of formation of laity and the youth. They play an active role in evangelization and in this more urban-rural mobility. And our observation is that this improved relationship between the Holy See and and China offers hope. For those who was in the previous section, I presented the experience of the Vatican, the Holy See Pavilion at the Beijing Expo. Somehow it was a multi-level. It's a possibility of a multi-level change in relationship between high-level relationship and also the relationship between the people to people, because visitors have a chance to visit the pavilion, and they change their perception. People start to ask, what is the Holy See? How is the relationship? So I think it's something at different levels that is changing. Also the relationship with the public, with the emphasis of Pope Francis giving testimony of being authentic Catholic and also good citizens. It helps to, at times of in the light and shadows of history, that the Church can contribute, like at times of the earthquake, Catholic groups, the Caritas, the gender charities were active, and it's a testimony of Christian charity. Pope Francis calls for a culture of care in front of the pandemic. On the feast day of Our Lady of Sichuan last year, May 24, Pope Francis voiced out his closeness to the Chinese faithful, to their country, emphasizes that they are an integral part of the universal church, assuring his love and strong bond, even in difficulties, to be strong in faith, steadfast in fraternal union, joyful witness, promoters of charity and hope, and good citizen. It was a happy coincidence that on the same day he announced 1 year of reflection on the Laudato Si. So Chinese Catholics in China, small in number, like a little flock of the early church, but aware of their historical responsibility, may help to change the landscape of the Catholic Church in due time. Thank you.
I want to ask you the same question I asked Bruno Lepeu, about youth in China. We see in Hong Kong and in the Western world, young generation becoming more, how to say, firm about a certain Catholic identity, Latin, Mass, these kind of things. So how is that in, which kind of identity is it? Because we have studies on youth Catholics in the Philippines, where we see them having a more conservative theology, but combined with more liberal individual values. So they're not just conservatives, they recreate Catholic identity. We see that in different ways also with young generations in France who are in many ways more conservative than the generation before. So how do you see that in China, about the transformation of the youth, their expression of a Catholic identity? I don't know if I'm clear.
You mentioned about Latin Mass?
Yes, for instance, because we see that in Hong Kong as well, where we have young generation becoming very attached to a specific expression of the Catholic tradition.
Well, that one is true that some want to emphasize or want to study about Latin Mass, liturgy, to go to the root of the Catholic identity, but well, it's just a small group out of interest, cultural interests. So it's not so much affirming their Catholic identity in this way. I don't think this what it can represent the general, but rather I think for the youth it's important because the youth, they speak the same language. They it's important to entering into their group. They often use social media, chat rooms, things like that. No? And to be among one of them, and they feel very much to be accompanied, to do things together, to participate things together. So I think this is rather more important.
You mentioned the activities for high schoolers among the urban migrants. I'm wondering, in the environment today, when the government seems to be clamping down on religious activities for youth, are those kinds of things still able to happen, or not?
They tune down the specific for high school students. They have to be cautious, not to at campus. They don't meet too much in the campus, but in church premises, it's okay. So it's a way to adapt. I was in the expo, and there were students doing volunteer works, and they approach us saying that I belong to this group, YCS, and in different places, and I mean, you have to adapt to the new situation, but things go on, keeps going.
This may follow up in a way on Michelle's question, but I have a sense, obviously, of the structural differences and the enormity of the shift from a rural to an urban environment. We talked on some of the things, I think, more in the Protestant churches but in terms of kind of the mindset of that, in terms of getting inside what the differences are, I've got a sense of the organizations maybe that people have that are different, but whether you can through anecdotes, or aside from the fact that maybe people use social media more, what's the difference? I mean, is it breaking down filial relationships that pass on religion within the family? Is there anything equivalent to the kind of secularization of France when people move to the cities? Is that what we're talking about? But I guess I'd really love to get our sense more like, what's the difference in mindset or thinking for people? Massive as the shift is, I want to get inside it a little bit more and understand it. I just know that there are associations that are forming or whatever. So if you can help me do that, that would be very helpful to me, getting inside.
For example, in the Catholic environment, there's a girl who went to Tangshan to study, and then she went and then at some point she said she didn't realize that mass was held in church, because she memorized all the prayers when she was 5 years old, and all the masses she attended was at home, and only when she went to the city, and then she saw that, of course, it's a particular case, no? Then so somehow maybe she was reluctant to show her identity, but then another girl has another experience. She came from Wenzhou, and she said when she was elementary 6, it was Christmas time, and then all the among her classmates, they knew nothing about Jesus. Only they all know only about Santa Claus, and then she started to distribute some pamphlets she got from the parish, and then, of course, she was stopped by the teacher. But then, when she entered university, even at meals, she would make the sign of the cross. Then, some classmates started to question her about the Christian faith, and said, then she said she can share with them because she saw others see something different in her, and they are interested. So now last year she was attending school online, coming to the U.S. But in this month she will fly here for the second year. Just to say, there are variety of experiences from the rural area and coming to city, or in this process of urbanization, which is really, as I mentioned, nothing has happened so in human history that not only migration but also urbanization, changing of environment, from rural area, from very poor rural area to cities, and then student will get a job after graduation and remain in the city. But nowadays, not so much at the first tier cities like Beijing, Shanghai, also to the second or third tier cities, or even Xi'an, where rentals are or apartments are cheaper and they can afford, and some will even bring in their parents. So in China, this migration, this change is happening. So people get adapt to the situation. So it's a really changing situation, very dynamic. Everybody going to adapt to it. Of course, there's a challenge of materialism and all that, and not so much poverty elevation in the material sense, but also spiritual poverty alleviation. So this social works of the church, the church is doing, is in a way is testimony, but at the same time is like occasion to collaborate, to build friendship.
Ask a question from both the Catholic and Protestant perspective about the integration of migrants to cities into the urban churches. My impression is, for instance, a place like Shanghai, but in others, is, the church was really founded on certain old families there. There's a deep family sense. And migrants coming in, they're not part of these families, right? And maybe in some cases at some of the main venues, I got the impression maybe they don't feel fully at home there, right? Because, these families are interacting and they know each other, and, and then in a place like Shanghai, especially, this issue of, YD rent, these outsiders, old Shanghaiese aren't especially enthusiastic to have a relationship with these outsiders, right? So how does it work if a Christian comes into the city, wants to go to church and interact with, the local church there? And is there a difference between, say, the Catholics and the Protestants' experience in the way that this happens or doesn't happen?
I think from the Protestant perspective, there's actually a difference in cities. The Shanghai house church has tended to be kind of similar to what you described with the Catholic Church. Very relational and in many ways closed. You couldn't get into a house church in Shanghai without being introduced by somebody. And they want to check you out before they let you come in. Whereas in Beijing, the doors have been a bit more open in the unregistered church for people to come in. But then you have class differences. So you have these urban unregistered churches, which I described earlier, comprised of a lot of middle class, well-educated people, many who've studied overseas, And you wouldn't find a lot of urban migrant or rural migrants to the city in those congregations. They wouldn't be accepted. They wouldn't feel comfortable there. And by and large, a lot of those emerging urban congregations didn't really reach out too well to the migrants. I know just from the Beijing experience, that was something that some of the urban emerging churches in Beijing were thinking about. How do we reach out to these migrants from the countryside, but not really knowing exactly how to do it? So a lot of the migrants from the countryside who were believers ended up in congregations of other migrants. They started migrant churches. And so I've been in communities, migrant communities in large cities where you had a lot of these migrants living all in the same compound, running little shops in that area or doing factory work or whatever. And then you're going along and looking at all these very small flats where people are living, and suddenly here's a church. And it's started by somebody from Henan who came along with the migrant wave and started this church, and that's where all the migrants would meet. So I think there's been kind of a class difference between the different kinds of urban Christians, at least on the Protestant side.
And maybe age as well, because I follow up a few unregistered churches in Shanghai, Protestants, and I really see one is very like graduate university students, and one is really like young couples, and it's different, almost different generation, different life patterns.
Yeah, as I have mentioned in my presentation, that what happened in Shanghai is that there's these groups of Catholics from Wenzhou. They are fervent Catholics. They want to learn. They want to have Bible studies. And then the diocese, when Bishop Jing was there, assigned a priest to be their spiritual director. In a way, it stimulates the local church, which is maybe a bit relaxed. So I think it's good in this sense, this mobility, this exchange of experience. I have some experiences with Protestant communities, especially in the universities, because we in the parish in the Catholic environment we have also activities for young people, but at the end, ultimately, most of them became Protestant. They were baptized in the Protestant church because they are at school. They're in the same environment. They have this fellowship together, so it's easier for them to join the church. But in this relationship, I remember one time I went to their group, went to their weddings, and then someone came with me, also to when I went to Mass, and there he said he experienced something new. This because they always go to the same community. Instead, if he has a chance to maybe also the same age, all university students in the fellowship. But in the Mass that we attended, there were families, there were adults, children, young people, kids, and he kind of liked it. It was something a new experience of being church for him. So I think it's always whether we talk about ecumenism or we talk about the collaboration between churches or communities. I think this kind of mobility or exchanges are helpful.
In Shanghai, are they truly from Wenzhou? When they say are they really from Wenzhou or not? Do you know?
Wenzhou is a big area that the young people, many people we meet are many from Wenzhou, many from Hebei also. Hebei is very much present. And then I remember at some point from Hebei, from Handan, and from Wenzhou, and then from Xianxian. At one point, Christmas time, the three communities from different places joined together, renting a restaurant to celebrate together. It's like a wedding feast like that with several hundred people.
Because in Guangzhou, if you ask the bishops, the local bishop of Guangzhou or the Jesuit, they tell you, yes, the underground, the unofficial Catholics, unregistered, they Wenzhou Laoban, but if you get to the Wenzhou Laoban, they are not from Wenzhou or from Zhejiang, they're all from northern Fujian. So you have multiple networks, and they use the name of Wenzhou, but they're not from Wenzhou. So there is a whole dynamic of identities. Anyway, that's in Guangzhou, but I don't know well enough in Shanghai. But the Wenzhou name
maybe
could be...
Wenzhou is most spoken about, but I know that there are groups also from Fujian. No, in Guangzhou, you are saying many comes from the Hakka area, the Chaozhou area, and they are not locals of Guangzhou city, not Canton city, but from the countryside of the Guangdong area.
Yeah, but my point was, in Guangzhou, it's interesting that people from Mintong claim to be from Wenzhou, which is not true, but there's an identity game there, which is very interesting. From Catholics coming from the oldest Catholic place of China, using a label that is identified with mostly Protestants, presenting themselves as Wenzhou Laoban when they're from Mintong. Anyway, so I don't really know in other big cities of China.
I believe it was spoken about, this phenomenon of Wenzhou Laoban, but not necessarily from Wenzhou. Also, because in Wenzhou, there are, because Wenzhou is just adjacent to Fujian, so some in Wenzhou actually came from Fujian. They even keep their dialect, the Mindong, the dialect, but they, precisely because of this mobility, social mobility, they move to Wenzhou, but they have roots also in Fujian, in Mindong. So it's kind of intermingled. So maybe in their presentation, maybe it happens that they identify, they say which is also true. It's not a lie that they say they are from Wenzhou.
I was in Hong Kong, and in the parish that I worked in, we had people from various different provinces, and they all spoke different languages. Chiu-Jiao, Guangdonghua, Songhuihua, all the different dialects. And the only way we could keep peace in our church was we had Dang Xing-san, and he could sort of negotiate with the different groups so that when we celebrated Mass or when we had a program, everybody was in agreement how we would do it. Because if there wasn't an agreement, it may not even happen. One of the thoughts I was wondering about is when people move to the urban areas, they lose the experience of the culture of the rural areas. And in urban settings in Detroit, where I work from, we could see clear patterns of behavior that led to this social disruption because of destruction of a culture when you put a highway through a neighborhood. And the people there were forced out, and all the things that happened because of it. Do we see any of that in the urbanization in China? Because it's so massive. There's so many people. And, the quality of China wanting harmonization, how do they keep that going with all that change?
So the question is, how do they harmonize
harmony in terms of all this change,
right?
the conflict that comes when you disrupt culture?
Yeah, that's been a huge challenge. I mean, what do you do when you have to redevelop a whole area of the city, knock down thousands of people's homes, and move them into apartments that they may not like or may never get?
Yes.
That's created, I mean, huge social unrest that I think we often don't hear about. There's local protests. Thousands of local protests every year because people's land is being appropriated or their houses are being knocked down. They've got to move. And I think the party has a huge challenge in how do you keep everybody together in the midst of that. Unfortunately, a lot of it has come down to just the use of force. When you hear about people being dislocated from their homes, trying to protest, and then at the end of the day, thugs are sent in to quiet them down or get them out of there or whatever. I think there's a lot of force being used to maintain the peace in the midst of all this disruption that's going on.
What I have seen, of course, there are negative aspects of dislocation or things like that. But in the urbanization process, I remember I went to some 20 some years ago. I went with a priest to this Taihu area in Zhejiang. Many Catholics were fishermen. They don't see a priest in. They see a couple of times in a year, so they would join together the boats and we had Eucharistic celebration there in the lake. But some years later, things have changed, and they were rehabilitated in inland. They are not, because their professions have changed. They have, I would say, much better homes. We held a meeting in Bible sharing at their home because they have a 2 stories, a big house nowadays. And then they are also in a city like Shanghai in the urbanization process. I think when I first arrived in Shanghai 27 years ago, the average area of habitation per person is about 4 meters. Now it's 50 meters. They are dislocated not dislocated. They are assigned in an apartment in a new area, but with the development of transportation, Shanghai people all became, millionaire because the house costs $1 million. Why? 30 years ago they didn't have that. Of course, it's a negotiation process. Some may want more. Some may want to protest because they don't want to go. They wait for to even to negotiate in the sense that they want to get better terms maybe. But in the general sense, their living conditions have improved quite a bit.
Thank you both very much.